Senior Fellow and the Director of Program on Palestine and the Palestinian-Israeli Affairs over at the Middle East Institute. Khaled, good to have you on the show. I'd like to begin by asking your thoughts on what's looking like, I mean, without a doubt, one of the deadliest periods of violence between Israelis and Palestinians in recent years.
There's no question about that. I think people were already quite alarmed by the events of last year, which was the deadliest year in the West Bank for Palestinians since 2005. Of course, Gaza has seen much more deadly violence, but in recent years, the West Bank has been relatively quiet. That has obviously changed, and this year is looking to be much worse in terms of the scale of bloodshed than even last year.
How much do you think is tied to Prime Minister Netanyahu returning to power and actually having Ben-Gvir as a national security minister?
I think it's hard to avoid the connection between the very dramatic spike in violence that we've seen over the past 2.5 months and the emergence of this new far-right government that is made up of extremists like Ben-Gvir, who himself is convicted in an Israeli court of inciting racism and supporting terrorism, and yet he's in charge of national security. So it's hard to imagine that there isn't a connection, because we do see a very dramatic rise in not the kinds of attacks by the Israeli army, but the frequency and scale certainly has increased since this new government has come to power.
How do you break this brutal cycle of Israeli raids against suspected Palestinian militants, and then Palestinian revenge attacks on Israelis, and then you have also obviously Israeli settlers targeting Palestinians?
Right. I mean, I think there are two things that are fueling the violence at the moment. One is, I think, the rise in Israeli extremism, not just on the part of the government, but also the settlers who feel now much more emboldened in attacking Palestinians than they were before, as we saw last week in Hawara. And the other thing that is fueling violence is this Palestinian sense of despair. There is no peace process. There is no prospect of a peace process. Hopes for Palestinian statehood have pretty much ended. I think that there's no reasonable pathway toward ending Israel's occupation, and so this is, I think, also helping to fuel this violence. So the way out would be to engage in a serious process that ends Israel's occupation, because occupation, by definition, is a form of sustained violence on a population who are basically deprived of their basic rights. And so when you have that kind of situation for 56 years now, we would expect to see attempts at resistance, and sometimes the resistance is in legitimate forms, and sometimes it's events like what we saw today of a Palestinian gunman shooting at Israeli civilians. But the only way out of this in the long term is a political process that will end Israel's occupation once and for all.
Okay. Khaled Elgindy, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much. I do appreciate talking to you.